So there's a new poster out right now. It's for Rob Zombie's movie 31. I'll get to that in a minute. Of course, the caption says, "What is wrong with Rob Zombie movies?" Now, to be fair, I don't actually think there's much wrong until we get to Halloween. But I'm going to go through each movie and see why they're such lowly rated, because as hard as the guy tries, he can't really seem to get above that 60% mark. So, without further ado, this is my opinion on what is wrong with Rob Zombie movies.
Reach out, touch faith.
So back in 2003, Rob Zombie decided to make a horror movie. That horror movie is called House of a Thousand Corpses. The movie itself wasn't actually that bad. It was kind of like a grindhousey idea, and for anyone that's ever seen the poster, you kind of see where I would get that idea from. Well, I'll get a picture of the poster and I'll put it up for you. But the movie itself is your bog standard psychotic family out in the middle of nowhere, people walking or driving by, and they get sucked in. Let's have a wee look at this poster then, eh? So that's the poster itself. I'm not really sure who that is on the poster, to be fair, but you have the house and you have everything else on it. The story itself is, like I said, pretty bog standard. However, it does begin out with some myths, and it has this kind of backstory mythos about different killers within the area, which I actually found pretty interesting. So the most interesting part is the mythos, which is the beginning and the end of the movie. Yeah, starting to see what the problem with this movie is. See, it starts off with the mythos, and I think that's what Rob Zombie's best at, creating these different iconic characters, say iconic, but creating these different characters, these masked, grindhousey style characters, which has always been pretty cool, and it's definitely a staple of Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez style, and this poster, this kind of whole action frame, is a kind of reminder of the way they are just put into a, say, horror movie form. The movie itself isn't really that scary. In fact, the main guy in it, who I'm not even going to bother to remember his name, but the long-haired guy in the movie, who's the main kind of psycho in it, not that scary at all. Doesn't have that frame about him. There's nothing really too memorable about him. It warps itself in. Now, the overall environment in the movie, again, we've seen it 100 times. We've seen it in like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's a house in the middle of nowhere. These people get trapped, tortured, except in this, there's kind of like a whole clowny element to it. At least I got that. Of course, he casts his wife in it as well, who has a very distinctive voice, and you'll be hearing that throughout the movie. Then you get the end of it, though, and the end, I think, is where it starts to kind of get better. The whole mythos that was brought up in the beginning of it isn't just left, it is explored, and we do get to see these kind of psychotic creative characters, but again, they only last maybe 10-15 minutes. That, I think, is the problem with House of a Thousand Corpses, is that it begins off with this promise of difference, and then it goes into just bog standard. The characters in itself aren't entirely strong. Like I said, I can barely remember any of them. And it's not exactly as if I haven't watched these movies. I did go over and watch these movies. I know I do these kind of takes and make it as quick as possible, hence the name Rush Reviews. But I do watch the movies and I do take kind of close attention and make some notes here and there. But the characters themselves are so unmemorable, it's a damn shame. So what is wrong with the House of a Thousand Corpses? Well, it relies on this shock factor and you don't really ever get it. We're the Saw generation. I'm pretty sure Saw came out in 2001, I'm pretty sure. So capitalising on that with a whole grindhousey kind of look, you're thinking it would go together. And for some people it did, I guess, but for most movie-going audiences, they could see through the whole aspect of the shock factor. You know, we get it done much better by Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez. Unfortunate, but there we go. Now, moving on to the second movie that is, in my opinion, an even more difficult. So continuing on the story from House of a Thousand Corpses, now I've got to give him credit for this one. A lot of people maybe don't continue on the story from the first one. He does here. So the psychos from House of a Thousand Corpses are on the run. They're on the lam. So what he's basically done in this one is You know, most of the scenes are done in broad daylight. Horror movies done in broad daylight, to me, just don't work. The House of Eyes is kind of an example for that. I'm not a huge fan of The House of Eyes, the original or the remake, mainly because I feel like horror relates to the night, and when you put it in the middle of the day, that fear aspect, that isolation aspect just gets lost. Yeah, and I mean, you can even see the poster of this movie as well, where, you know, they're in the broad daylight. You know, there's a big bearded guy, there's a clown guy that's not got he's not got his clown makeup on, which is his scariest aspect, to be fair. And of course, he's his wife as well, who's a continuous character to be cast by Rob Zombie. By no means not a problem, to be fair. Her acting's pretty okay, with a distinctive voice. Now, The Devil's Rejects in itself, to me, loses all the things that make The House of a Thousand Corpses good. That scary, different, over-the-top mythos that was in the first one, you know, with the whole doctor guy with a mask and his little assistant, again, with this kind of mask, they're missing. So that whole horror aspect, to me, is missing. This kind of goes for a more Last House on the Left approach. You know, where they have people, they kidnap them, and the ending is very just batshit crazy. They pretty much run into a police roadblock and they die. And that in itself is a pretty shit ending, to be honest with you. And again, though, Rob Zombie in this movie kind of tries to create slight empathy for his killers, but, you know, this was kind of marketed as a horror. The same as, you know, it's the second movie in the House of a Thousand Corpses sequel, so it's marketed as a horror, but it's definitely not executed like that, which again, I think House of a Thousand Corpses begins and ends as a horror, but, you know, that 80% in the middle is also, it doesn't work for me anyway. It's a damn shame, actually, because I think The Devil's Rejects is actually rated better than House of a Thousand Corpses, and in my actual opinion, I think House of a Thousand Corpses was actually a little bit better. So, you know, but that's just me. Different people have different aspects of it. Now, 2009, Rob Zombie comes out with probably his weirdest movie. It's an animation.
Someone to be your friend, someone who cares.
Well, if we're talking about a who cares aspect, well, I mean, let's just have a little look at this poster. This is actually my favourite Rob Zombie movie. I mean, it's an animation and it's batshit insane. I think if Rob Zombie was to make a movie, you know, kind of like Grindhouse, which is the idea that he's going for in his movies, then he should just continue on like that. Awesome kills, insane characters, and just mash it all in and see what he comes up with. In House of a Thousand Corpses, he seems to have kind of just toned it down a lot at the beginning and the end. Yeah, he's just like, yeah, look at all this kind of stuff that's came from my head. And then for 80% of the movie, you've got characters that you don't really care about. Again, with Devil's Rejects, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, all this kind of thing. You know, you could have a guy walking in with a shotgun and just blasting someone's face off because he's insane, and that would be the only reason. But we don't get that. Hence the reason why I like this movie so much. I mean, it's got complete animated nudity and all that kind of stuff in it. Besides that, however, this movie itself is just insanity. And I've got to admit, I do like this movie, but again, it's got poor... it has poor ratings by critics and reviews and all that. Like I said, you know, Rob Zombie can't really escape that, I don't think. I think he's a very specific kind of person. I think he's that kind of grindhouse kind of view. But this, to me, is definitely Rob Zombie at his best, when he just doesn't give a fuck and he just decides, you know what, let's put it on screen because it might be entertaining. And this movie is probably the most entertaining. I'd much rather watch this than watch some beardy guy with a knife, because that seems to be what he likes. Now we have Halloween. I'll probably start out this review by quoting Rob Zombie sometime between 2003 and 2009. Rob Zombie was quoted as saying, "There's no point in remaking a good movie." That in itself should be said. Halloween is probably one of the most recognised and famous horror movies to be done. It starts off as a kid killing his sister. There's no reason behind it. There's nothing. So when you make the first 45 minutes of your movie the reason for Michael Myers going insane, doesn't work. Yeah. Rob Zombie missed the point of Halloween and kind of continued on. Sort of like George Lucas in the prequels. He missed the whole point but had to just continue on anyway. The second half of the movie is kind of like cat and mouse, where people get... Well, not really cat and mouse, actually. The whole point of Halloween, the original, was cat and mouse. It was Michael Myers knew where he was getting to his sister, going through all these people. Whereas this one, I guess it's just Michael Myers killing people for the sake of it, and then finally finding his sister, but then not really sure what to do with it, because he's got so many opportunities to kill her, then he doesn't, and then he does, and then she shoots him in the face in the pool. And Halloween was an exceptionally disappointing movie. Even more disappointing at the fact that Rob Zombie said that he didn't want to really be a part of it. So I think Rob Zombie could have kept a little bit of, his opinion to himself when he was in that interview, saying, yeah, good movies shouldn't be remade. There's plenty of bad movies out there that could be done pretty good. I mean, there's so many people that have actually said, like The Burning and all that, like movies from the 80s and slamming. Because in the 80s there was a lot of slasher movies that came out just as part of like this slasher movie trend, just trying to make a quick buck now and then. There's plenty of them to choose from, and he chooses a franchise he chooses to direct a franchise that's already existed. And to be fair, Halloween, like 4, 5, 6, they kind of start ripping themselves to shreds, and then you get Resurrection with Busta Rhymes. But here's the thing that they all have in common: he keeps his fucking mask on. Yeah. Halloween 2, directed by Rob Zombie. Most of the movie he's like that. He doesn't have his mask on. That's a problem. When your whole franchise, or when your movie is based on the fact that your character wears a faceless, emotionless mask, and you've got him walking about slumped like that, looking like a bearded hobo, yeah, that beardy guy comes in again. Not the same guy, but that bearded character comes in again, but this time he's Michael Myers. That pissed a lot of people off, and I think Rob Zombie missed the point of that movie, which sucked, because he could have done something about it, in later movies in the Halloween franchise. He was a part of a cult, I think, or something to do with that, and he had markings on him, and it was a curse that he had on him, hence why he had to kill every member of the family. Maybe it could have been something like that. No, Rob Zombie slotted in this religious aspect, put his wife back in the movie as a white ghost or something. Halloween 2 became so convoluted, and Rob Zombie was quoted as saying, before the movie was even made, said that it wouldn't be a part of the sequel. Then he decides to be a part of the sequel. See, that hypocrisy, or going back on your word like that, can really piss people off. Now, I mean, it's titled What is Wrong with Rob Zombie Movies. In the Halloween movies, I can definitely say this: unlikable, unempathetic characters. Every single one of them. That is definitely one of the biggest problems. I think he has a problem writing characters. He can't decipher them out. He can't just have a nice guy who's maybe had a bad childhood and became nice about it. He seems to just have this idea of these dark, troubled people continuing on dark, troubled lives, which would be fine, except when you get that whole basis to do that in Halloween, continue on that, oh, he's a bad guy because evil. That's when he decides to try and make him empathetic. And then when all the characters around him, Michael Myers, are dicks, you don't want them to survive. Part of the point of the original was these weren't exactly bad people. They were teenagers, so they wanted to have a bit of fun. That was it. But they were still babysitters, so they still had that element of emotion and, trust about them. So you're like, well, they're just teenagers. We don't want them to die. Whereas in Rob Zombie's version, it's just pure dicks that die, and so many people seen a problem with that. And again, these movies were with pretty low ratings. See, I'm trying to go through these and judge why it's so low rated, and I do think that empathy is a big part of it. to have characters that you don't want to die is definitely a big part of your movie. I'm just looking through here. I'm pretty sure there's another one that's called The Lords of Salem, which is his 2012 movie. Didn't hear much about it, and didn't see much about it when it came out either. But it actually seemed more interesting to me. I think it did look good. Once again, he cast his wife as the main character, but I think that The Lords of Salem actually had a lot of good things in it. So I will say that from some reviews that I've seen on it, and you know, all the critics and all that can pretty much fuck off. I will say that The Lords of Salem to me, because it's very interesting, the Salem witch trials, you know, the Crucible by Arthur Miller and all that, all these kind of things I'm very interested in. The hypocrisy of religion, which is something that Rob Zombie's very big on, which is not something I can really disagree with. So I will give this, when I see The Lords of Salem, I'll maybe put out a little review on it. I'm going to say that the Haunted World of El Superbeasto and The Lords of Salem would probably be two movies in Rob Zombie's roster to watch. Maybe the only two. But yeah, this is a new poster that literally just came out. It's for his new movie, 31.
Someone to be oppressed, someone who's there.
Now, I actually think that this guy looks, well, this clown mask just kind of looks like a kind of more brutal, which is how it's supposed to be. But, you know, so many people said the House of a Thousand Corpses and the Devil Rejects were brutal. I disagreed. So this kind of looks like the guy from House of a Thousand Corpses. It's got the exact same makeup as him, you know, the clown guy. And I fucking hope not, because if this is that, then I'm not going to want to watch it. The actual poster itself doesn't give too much away, but yeah, I mean, look, the clown guy at the top left there, you know, he's got that kind of, if you can see, if anyone's ever seen it, it's kind of the same makeup. So hopefully Rob Zombie's not just giving this character his full movie. Hopefully this is a different style movie, and hopefully I can say that there's 3 movies in Rob Zombie's roster that I would recommend. But for now, yeah, I think Rob Zombie's got a problem writing characters, making them empathetic, and I think that's his main problem. Second problem is he kind of goes for that shock factor, but he doesn't pay off on it. And I think the third problem with it is his horror elements. He kind of strays too far away from horror. I think horror can be pretty simply done. You know, you get a dark place with a masked figure and let it commence, you know, jump scares and building up tension, which is another thing actually with all of these movies. There's no real tension involved in any of them, so you don't get emotionally involved. But yeah, what I will say is what I think's right with Rob Zombie movies is Rob Zombie seems to have this unimaginable creativity involved with him. Now, I watched the first Halloween when it came out and I was pretty young at the time, and even then I got to say, you know, I didn't care about Michael Myers as a kid just back then. But yeah, Rob Zombie has this imagination which is beyond most people. It has a certain amount of creativity in creating these characters and creating these stories, and his visuals are pretty awesome as well. So if you want a visually nice experience or a visually different experience, I definitely watch these movies, but unfortunately you're going to get dragged down by characters that you really don't give a fuck about, and you genuinely want them all dead. And that does go for the Halloween movies as well. But I would recommend, without watching, The Lords of Salem, and, you know, if you just want a batshit crazy movie to watch, you know, The Haunted World of El Superbeasto. The last thing I want to say is, I don't own this picture, but I think it's a pretty awesome picture, so whoever put that together is pretty awesome. But yeah, so this has been my video on Rob Zombie movies. Of course I'm going to be watching 31 because it's a horror movie, and I'm a big fan of horror movies. That being said, I'm not a massive fan of Rob Zombie, but I will go watch The Lords of Salem. So, yeah, I'll catch you when I've watched that. Have a good night, and Rob Zombie, please learn from your mistakes. Let me relate to one of your characters.